The blood on her dress looked black in the moonlight, and when she collapsed against his cabin door, the sound of her body hitting wood was what finally pulled Wyatt Oakes from his whiskey-soaked brooding. He opened the door to find her crumpled on his porch, one hand pressed to her side, dark eyes looking up at him with a mixture of desperation and defiance that made something twist in his chest. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with long dark hair that had come loose from its pins and skin that had gone pale beneath the dirt and blood. Without a word, Wyatt bent down and scooped her into his arms, carrying her inside his cabin as if she weighed nothing at all. His shoulders were broad from years of trapping and hunting in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, his arms thick with muscle that came from splitting wood and hauling water and living a life that demanded strength. He kicked the door shut behind him and laid her on his bed, the only real piece of furniture in the sparse cabin besides a table and 2 chairs. She tried to speak, but he shook his head. "Do not talk. Save your strength." He moved with practiced efficiency, lighting more lamps to see by, heating water on the wood stove, gathering clean cloths from his trunk. The cabin was small but clean, with animal pelts on the walls and a rifle mounted above the door. It was autumn in 1882, and the nights in the mountains of New Mexico territory had started to turn cold. The fire in the stove crackled and popped as he worked. When he returned to her side, she was watching him with those dark eyes, trying to assess whether she could trust him. He met her gaze steadily. "I need to see the wound." She nodded slightly, and he carefully moved her hand away from her side. The dress was ruined, soaked through with blood, and he pulled his hunting knife from his belt. She flinched, and he paused. "I'm just cutting the fabric. I need to see what I'm working with." He cut away the layers of her dress and the chemise beneath, revealing a gunshot wound high on her left side, just below her ribs. The bullet had gone clean through, which was good. No digging around in her flesh trying to extract lead. But she had lost a lot of blood, and the wound needed to be cleaned and bandaged quickly. Wyatt worked in silence, washing the wound with the hot water, pressing clean cloths against it to stop the bleeding. She bit down on a leather strap he gave her, her body going rigid with pain, but she did not cry out. He respected that. When he was satisfied that the wound was as clean as he could get it, he wrapped long strips of cloth around her torso, binding it tight. "You will live," he said simply, pulling a blanket over her. "Get some rest." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Then her eyes drifted closed and she was asleep or unconscious. Wyatt was not sure which. He sat in one of his chairs, watching her breathe, his own whiskey forgotten. He was 31 years old and had been living alone in these mountains for the better part of 6 years, ever since he had walked away from the life he had known in Kansas. He had come to New Mexico territory looking for solitude, for a place where the world could not find him, where he did not have to think about what he had lost. He trapped in the winter, hunted year-round, and made the long journey down to Roswell, New Mexico twice a year to trade his furs and stock up on supplies. He spoke to almost no one, and that was how he preferred it. And now, this woman had shown up at his door, bleeding and desperate, and he had taken her in without asking a single question. He told himself it was because he was not the kind of man who left someone to die, but somewhere deep down, he knew it was more than that. There had been something in her eyes, some spark of fierce will that had called to something in him that he thought had died a long time ago. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pines. Wyatt added more wood to the fire and settled in to keep watch through the night. She woke the next morning to pale sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and then the pain in her side reminded her. She turned her head to see the mountain man sitting at his table, drinking from a tin cup. He was even bigger than she remembered from the night before, with shoulders that seemed too wide for the chair he sat in and arms that strained against the fabric of his wool shirt. His hair was dark brown and fell to his shoulders, and he had a thick beard that did not quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. "You are awake," he said, standing and bringing her a cup of water. "Drink this slowly." She took the cup with shaking hands and sipped. The water was cold and clean, and it felt like heaven on her parched throat. "What is your name?" "Wyatt. Wyatt Oakes." "I'm Clara," she said, and then hesitated. Clara Crawford. He nodded, accepting this, and did not ask anything more. She watched him move around the cabin, marveling at how graceful he was for such a large man. He brought her coffee and then a bowl of something that turned out to be venison stew, helping her sit up enough to eat without pulling at her wound. The food was simple but good, and she ate hungrily despite the pain. "How long have I been here?" she asked. "One night. You arrived just after midnight." Clara looked down at the bandages wrapped around her torso, at the clean blanket covering her. "Thank you for helping me. I did not know where else to go." "You do not need to thank me," Wyatt said, "and you do not need to explain anything you do not want to explain." She met his eyes, searching for judgment or curiosity, but found only a calm acceptance. It was so unexpected after everything she had been through that she felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I should leave as soon as I can. I do not want to bring trouble to your door." "You are not going anywhere for at least a few days," Wyatt said firmly. "You need rest and time to heal. Whatever trouble you are running from can wait." Clara wanted to argue, but she was so tired, and the thought of leaving this warm, safe cabin made her feel sick with dread. So she nodded and let him help her lie back down, and within minutes she was asleep again. The days passed slowly. Wyatt tended to her wound twice a day, changing the bandages and checking for signs of infection. His hands were gentle despite their size, and he never asked about how she'd gotten shot or who she was running from. Clara found herself watching him when she was awake, studying the way he moved through the world with such quiet confidence. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that made you feel safe. On the third day, she was strong enough to sit up on her own, and Wyatt brought her one of his shirts to wear since her dress was ruined. It was far too big on her, hanging past her thighs, but it was clean and warm. She sat by the fire while he worked on repairing a trap, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like peace. "You live up here all alone?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I do. Does it not get lonely?" Wyatt looked up from his work, considering the question. "Sometimes. But lonely is better than the alternative." Clara understood that. She had spent the last year surrounded by people and had never felt more alone in her life. "How long have you been here?" 6 years. Came out from Kansas after—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "After it was time to leave." She did not push, respecting his privacy the way he had respected hers. Instead, she said, "It is beautiful here. I can see why you stayed." Wyatt glanced out the window at the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It is. Harsh sometimes, especially in winter, but beautiful." "Do you ever go into town?" "Twice a year. Roswell, about 30 miles southeast. Trade my furs and get supplies." He set down the trap and looked at her directly. "When you are well enough, I can take you there if that is where you want to go." Clara bit her lip. The thought of going to Roswell filled her with anxiety. It was too close to where she had come from, too easy for someone to find her. "Is there anywhere else? Another town, maybe farther away?" "Santa Fe is about 100 miles north. Las Cruces is south. Why? What are you afraid of?" She shook her head. "I cannot tell you. It is better if you do not know." Wyatt studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing whether to press the issue. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But if someone comes looking for you up here, I need to know what I am dealing with." "I do not think anyone will find this place," Clara said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "And I will leave before I put you in danger." "You are not leaving until you are healed," Wyatt said firmly. "We can figure out the rest when you are stronger." That night, Clara lay awake listening to Wyatt's steady breathing from where he slept on the floor beside the fire. He had insisted she keep the bed, refusing any argument. She thought about how strange it was that she felt safer here, with a man she had known for only 3 days, than she had felt in months. There was something about Wyatt Oakes that inspired trust. Maybe it was the way he had asked no questions, demanded no explanations. Maybe it was the gentleness in his hands when he tended her wound, or the quiet strength in his voice when he told her she was safe. Whatever it was, Clara found herself wanting to stay in this cabin far longer than was wise. By the end of the first week, Clara was able to walk around the cabin without too much pain. Wyatt showed her where he kept things and taught her how to work the wood stove. She insisted on helping with small tasks, needing to feel useful, and he let her wash dishes and fold blankets and prepare vegetables for their meals. They fell into an easy rhythm, working alongside each other in comfortable silence, broken by occasional conversation. Clara learned that Wyatt had grown up on a farm in Kansas, the oldest of 4 brothers. His parents had died of fever when he was 23, and his brothers had gone their separate ways. He had stayed to work the farm for a few more years, but after a bad drought and mounting debt, he had sold what was left and headed west. He did not talk about why he had chosen to live alone in the mountains, and Clara did not ask. In turn, she told him small things about herself. She had grown up in El Paso, Texas, the daughter of a shopkeeper. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her alone. She was 24 years old, loved to read, and had always dreamed of seeing more of the world. She did not tell him about the man she had run from or why she had been shot. That story was still too painful, too dangerous. One afternoon, Clara was sitting on the porch steps watching Wyatt chop wood when she saw how the muscles in his back and shoulders moved beneath his shirt with each swing of the axe. There was something mesmerizing about his raw physical power, the way he seemed so completely at home in his body and in this wild place. When he finished and came to sit beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead, she found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the heat radiating from him and the way his arm brushed against hers. "You are healing well," he said, his eyes on the mountains. "The wound looks clean. No infection." "Thanks to you," Clara said. "I would have died if I had not found your cabin." "You would have found another way to survive," Wyatt said. "You are tougher than you think." Clara looked at him surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Anyone who can ride through these mountains at night with a bullet wound and not die from it has steel in their spine. You may be scared, but you are not weak." Something about the certainty in his voice made Clara's throat tighten. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, as if her strength was simply a fact rather than something she had to prove. "I do not feel very strong," she admitted quietly. Wyatt turned to look at her then, his blue-gray eyes intense. "Strength is not about never being afraid. It is about doing what needs to be done anyway." They sat in silence for a while, the mountain wind cool against their faces. Clara wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself of the weight she had been carrying, but she was afraid of what he would think of her, afraid that if she spoke the truth aloud, he would send her away. "Wyatt," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "can I stay here a little longer, just until I figure out what to do next?" He looked at her and something in his expression softened. "You can stay as long as you need to." Relief flooded through her, so strong it made her dizzy. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden," Wyatt said simply. Then he stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, I will show you where I check my traps. If you are going to be here for a while, you should know your way around." Clara took his hand, marveling at how small hers looked in his calloused palm, and let him pull her to her feet. Over the next few weeks, Clara grew stronger. The wound in her side healed to an angry pink scar, and the pain faded to a dull ache. Wyatt took her on walks through the forest, teaching her to recognize animal tracks and edible plants. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits and how to read the weather in the clouds. Clara absorbed everything, hungry for knowledge and grateful for the distraction. She also started to notice other things. The way Wyatt smiled when she made a joke, a rare expression that transformed his serious face. The way he always made sure she ate first before serving himself. The way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. And she noticed her own reactions to him, the way her pulse quickened when he was near, the way she found excuses to touch his arm or stand close to him. It was dangerous, this growing attraction. Clara knew she should not let herself feel anything for Wyatt. She was still running from her past, still in danger. And he was a man who had chosen solitude, who had built a life away from the world. She had no right to complicate that with her problems or her feelings, but she could not seem to help herself. One evening in early November, the first real snow began to fall. Clara stood on the porch watching the flakes drift down, coating the pine trees in white. Wyatt came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Winter comes early up here," he said. "By next month, the pass will be snowed in. No one can get through until spring." Clara turned to look at him, her heart pounding. Are you saying I will be trapped here? I am saying you will be safe here, Wyatt corrected. No one can reach this cabin once the snow gets deep, not until the thaw. It should have frightened her, the idea of being isolated for months. Instead, Clara felt a rush of something that might have been relief or might have been something else entirely. Is that all right with you? Having me here that long? Wyatt was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. I've gotten used to having you here. The cabin feels less empty. It was not quite a declaration, but it was close enough to make Clara's breath catch. She turned to face him fully, looking up at him through the falling snow. He was looking down at her with an intensity that made her skin flush despite the cold. Wyatt, she began, but he shook his head. You do not have to say anything, he said. I just wanted you to know that you are welcome here, for as long as you want to stay. Clara reached up and touched his face, her palm against his bearded cheek. He went very still beneath her hand, his eyes searching hers. What if I want to stay, she whispered. Then stay, he said simply. And then he was kissing her, his mouth warm and sure against hers, one hand cupping the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist, careful of her healing wound. Clara melted into him, her arms going around his neck, and for the first time since she had fled El Paso, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. I should not have done that, he said, though he made no move to let her go. Why not? Because you have been through something terrible. Because you are vulnerable and scared. Because I should be better than this. Clara pulled back enough to look him in the eye. I am not that fragile, Wyatt, and I wanted you to kiss me. I've wanted it for weeks. His eyes darkened at that admission. Clara, I know I still have not told you everything, she said quickly, and I know I'm bringing danger to your door just by being here. But whatever this is between us, it is real, and I'm tired of running from things that are real. Wyatt studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right? But when you are ready to tell me the truth about what happened to you, I want to hear it. All of it. I will, Clara promised, just not tonight. He kissed her again, softer this time, and then led her back inside where the fire was warm and the world outside could not touch them. That night, Clara slept in Wyatt's arms for the first time, his body curved protectively around hers in the narrow bed. She felt safe in a way she had not thought possible anymore, and when she woke in the morning to find him watching her with those storm cloud eyes, she felt something in her chest crack open. Good morning, she murmured, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Morning, he rumbled, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. How do you feel? Good. Better than good. She smiled at him. Happy. Something flickered in his expression, something tender and almost vulnerable. I like seeing you smile. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking quietly and stealing kisses, until finally Wyatt forced himself to get up and start the fire. Clara watched him move around the cabin, still shirtless, and admired the play of muscles across his back and shoulders. He was beautiful in a raw, masculine way that made her ache with wanting. But she also knew that before this could go any further, she owed him the truth. She could not build something real with Wyatt based on lies and omissions. So as they sat down to breakfast, she took a deep breath and said, I am ready to tell you what happened. Why I showed up here with a gunshot wound. Wyatt set down his coffee and gave her his full attention. I am listening. Clara wrapped her hands around her own cup, gathering her courage. 6 months ago, my father died. He had a heart attack in the shop, and by the time I found him, it was too late. He did not leave much money, and the shop was mortgaged. I tried to keep it going, but I could not manage it alone. She paused, the memory still painful. Wyatt reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her skin. The simple gesture gave her strength to continue. There was a man in El Paso, Douglas Morrison. He was wealthy, owned several businesses, and had a reputation for being charming and generous. After my father died, he started coming around, offering to help me with the shop. At first I was grateful. He seemed kind, and I was so overwhelmed and alone. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes. I thought I was being practical, making a smart decision. Clara's voice hardened. But after we were engaged, everything changed. He became controlling, jealous. He did not want me to have friends or leave the house without him. He would get angry over small things, and that anger, she swallowed hard. It scared me. I tried to break off the engagement, but he refused to accept it. He said I belonged to him now, that I had no right to change my mind. Wyatt's hand tightened on hers, his jaw clenched. But he said nothing, letting her tell the story at her own pace. I planned to leave El Paso anyway, to just disappear one night, but Douglas found out. He came to the house in a rage, accusing me of trying to make him look like a fool. We argued, and when I tried to leave, he pulled out a gun. Clara touched her side unconsciously. He said if he could not have me, no one would. The gun went off. I do not even think he meant to pull the trigger, but it did not matter. I was bleeding and terrified, and all I could think was that I had to get away. "How did you get out?" Wyatt asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "There was a horse hitched outside. I took it and rode north, heading for the mountains. I thought if I could just get far enough away, Douglas would not follow. I rode for hours until I could barely stay in the saddle, and then I saw the light from your cabin." Wyatt was silent for a long moment, his thumb still moving across her knuckles. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "This Douglas Morrison, is he the kind of man who will come looking for you?" "I do not know," Clara admitted. "Part of me thinks he will be too proud, that he will tell everyone I ran off and make himself the victim. But another part of me is terrified that he will not let it go, that he will keep searching until he finds me." "If he comes here, he will regret it," Wyatt said flatly. Clara looked up at him, seeing the cold fury in his eyes. "Wyatt, no. I do not want you to get hurt because of me. That is why I have been so afraid to tell you. I am bringing danger to your doorstep." "I can handle danger," Wyatt said. "What I cannot handle is the thought of someone hurting you and getting away with it." He stood and came around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "You are safe here, Clara. I promise you that. And if this man comes looking for you, I will make sure he never threatens you again." Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him pine and smoke and something essentially masculine. "I'm so tired of being afraid." "Then stop being afraid," Wyatt said, his lips against her hair. "You have me now, and I'm not going anywhere." It was a vow, simple and absolute, and Clara chose to believe it. The weeks passed, and Clara began to truly settle into life in the mountains. She learned to cook over the wood stove, making stews and biscuits and even a passable venison roast. She helped Wyatt with his traps, learning to skin rabbits and tan hides. The work was hard and sometimes unpleasant, but there was satisfaction in it, in learning skills that made her useful and self-sufficient. And through it all, her relationship with Wyatt deepened. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for the future. He told her about his brothers, how he sometimes missed them, but did not regret leaving Kansas. She told him about her mother, who had loved poetry and taught Clara to read before she died. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies that came from sharing a small space. The physical attraction between them grew as well. Wyatt was always careful with her, mindful of her healing wound. But as November turned to December and the snow piled higher around the cabin, their restraint began to fray. Clara would catch him looking at her with hunger in his eyes, and she knew he saw the same desire reflected in her own gaze. One night, as they lay together in bed, Clara ran her hand down Wyatt's bare chest, feeling the hard muscles beneath the skin. His breath hitched, and she looked up to find him watching her with barely controlled need. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Your wound has healed," Clara finished, "and I am sure, Wyatt, I want this. I want you." He groaned and rolled on top of her, supporting his weight on his forearms as he kissed her deeply. His body was hot and heavy against hers, all hard muscle and barely leashed power. Clara wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, and when they finally came together, it felt like coming home. Afterward, as they lay tangled in each other, Wyatt traced the scar on her side with gentle fingers. "I hate that someone hurt you," he said quietly. "I wish I could have been there to stop it." "You saved me anyway," Clara said, turning to kiss him. "You gave me a place to heal, a place to feel safe. That is more than I ever hoped for." He pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. "I was just existing before you came here," he admitted. "Going through the motions, trapping and hunting, and not really living. But you changed that. You made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond simple survival." Clara's eyes stung with sudden tears. "I love you," she whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon, and we have only known each other a couple of months. But I do. I love you, Wyatt." He was quiet for so long that Clara started to panic, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But then he tilted her face up to his and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "From the moment you collapsed on my porch, you have been under my skin. I tried to tell myself it was just concern, just basic human decency. But the truth is, I started falling for you that first night, watching you fight to stay conscious, too stubborn to give up even when you were bleeding out." Clara laughed through her tears. "That's a strange thing to fall in love with." "Maybe," Wyatt agreed, "but I am a strange man. I live alone in the mountains and ask no questions when beautiful women show up at my door with bullet wounds." "Has that happened often?" Clara teased. "You are the first," he said seriously. "And if I have my way, you will be the last. Stay with me, Clara, not just for the winter, but always. Make a life with me here." Clara's breath caught. It was everything she wanted and had been afraid to hope for. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," Wyatt said. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know I do not have much to offer, just this cabin and a hard life in the mountains. But I will spend every day making sure you are safe and loved and happy. That is my promise to you." Clara kissed him fiercely, pouring all her love and hope into it. "Yes," she said when they broke apart. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not need anything but you, Wyatt. You are enough. You are everything." They made love again, slow and sweet, sealing their promise to each other. And when Clara finally fell asleep in Wyatt's arms, she did so, knowing that she had found her home at last. Winter settled over the mountains in earnest. The snow drifted as high as the cabin windows, and the temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the glass. But inside, the cabin was warm and cozy. Wyatt kept the fire burning day and night, and Clara learned to love the quiet rhythm of their days. They woke together, made breakfast, and then spent the mornings working on whatever tasks needed doing. Afternoons were for reading. Clara discovered that Wyatt had a small collection of books that he had accumulated over the years, or for long conversations. Evenings were for making love and falling asleep wrapped in each other's warmth. On Christmas Day, Wyatt surprised Clara with a gift he had been carving in secret, a wooden comb with delicate flowers carved into the handle. Clara held it carefully, marveling at the craftsmanship. It is beautiful," she breathed. "Wyatt, I did not know you could do work this fine." He shrugged, looking pleased but embarrassed. "My father taught me when I was young. I have not made anything like that in years, but I wanted you to have something special." Clara threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. "I love it, and I love you." She pulled back with a sheepish expression. "I wish I had something to give you, but I have nothing." "You gave me yourself," Wyatt said simply. "That is the only gift I need." They spent the day together, making a special meal of roasted duck that Wyatt had shot a few days before, and Clara taught him a card game her father used to play with her. It was simple and perfect, and Clara thought she had never been happier. But as January arrived and the new year of 1883 began, Clara started to feel restless. It was not that she wanted to leave far from it, but she could not shake the nagging worry that Douglas Morrison was still out there, that he might somehow find her. She tried to hide her anxiety from Wyatt, but he knew her too well by now. "Talk to me," he said one night as they lay in bed. "You have been distant today. What is wrong?" Clara sighed. "I'm just being foolish, worrying about things I cannot control." "About Morrison?" She nodded. "I keep thinking about what will happen when the snow melts and the pass opens up again. What if he comes looking for me? What if someone in Roswell mentions seeing you and he realizes where I might be hiding?" Wyatt rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "Then I will deal with him." "I do not want you to have to deal with him," Clara said, frustrated. "I do not want my past to become your problem." Your past became my problem the moment I let you into my cabin, Wyatt said firmly. And I have no regrets about that. But if it will make you feel better, we can make a plan. Figure out what we will do if he shows up. Clara considered this. What kind of plan? Well, for one thing, you are not helpless. I can teach you to shoot, to defend yourself. And when the pass opens, we can ride to Roswell together. See if there is any word about Morrison or anyone looking for you. If there is, we can decide then whether to stay here or move somewhere else. You would leave this place? Clara asked, surprised. I thought you loved it here. I do, Wyatt said, but I love you more. If staying here puts you in danger, then we will go somewhere else, maybe up to Colorado or over to Arizona. I can trap and hunt anywhere. Clara felt her eyes fill with tears again. You would give up your home for me? In a heartbeat, Wyatt said, and she knew he meant it. She pulled him down for a kiss, trying to convey without words how much his loyalty meant to her. I do not deserve you. Yes, you do, he said against her lips. You deserve someone who will protect you and cherish you, and I plan to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that. Over the next few weeks, Wyatt taught Clara to shoot. They started with his rifle, setting up targets outside the cabin and having her practice until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil. But Clara was determined, and soon she could hit the center of the target more often than not. Wyatt also gave her a revolver to practice with, teaching her to load and clean it until the motions became second nature. You are a good student, he said one afternoon, watching her reload with quick, confident movements. A natural. Clara felt a surge of pride. A few months ago she would have fainted at the idea of firing a gun. Now she felt capable, strong. I had a good teacher. As February arrived, the days started to grow longer and the snow began to slowly melt. Wyatt checked his traps less often now, spending more time with Clara, and she sensed he was reluctant for winter to end. She felt the same way. Their time isolated in the cabin had been like living in a beautiful dream, and she was not ready for the outside world to intrude. But reality could not be held off forever. In early March, Wyatt announced that the pass would be clear enough for travel within the week. We should go to Roswell soon, he said. I need to trade my furs and we need supplies. Plus, we can see if anyone has been asking questions about you. Clara nodded, trying to push down the anxiety that flared in her chest. All right. When do you want to leave? A few more days. I want to make sure the trails are safe first. Those last few days in the cabin felt precious to Clara. She tried to memorize every detail, the way the firelight played across Wyatt's face, the sound of his laugh, the feel of his arms around her at night. She was being silly, she knew. They would be gone for only a few days, and then they would return. But she could not shake the feeling that once they left this safe haven, everything would change. The morning they set out for Roswell, Clara dressed in clothes Wyatt had modified for her, a pair of his trousers, cut down to fit her smaller frame, a heavy wool shirt, and a coat made from rabbit fur. She looked more like a mountain woman than the shopkeeper's daughter she had been, and she liked it. This version of herself was stronger, braver. They rode out as the sun was rising, Wyatt on his big roan gelding and Clara on a gentler mare he kept for packing supplies. The journey down from the mountains was beautiful, the landscape transitioning from snowy pine forests to rolling high desert. They camped that night under the stars, and Wyatt made love to her with the Milky Way stretched out above them like a banner. They reached Roswell on the afternoon of the second day. It was a small town, dusty and wind-worn, with a single main street lined with shops and a saloon. Clara felt exposed the moment they rode in, hyper-aware of every person who glanced their way. She kept the brim of her hat low and stayed close to Wyatt as he conducted his business, trading his furs at the general store and buying supplies. The storekeeper, an older man with a weathered face, gave Clara a curious look but said nothing. It was not until Wyatt mentioned that he was getting married that the man spoke up. "Congratulations," he said, shaking Wyatt's hand. "About time you settled down. It is not good for a man to be alone so much." "I agree," Wyatt said, smiling at Clara. "Do you know if there is anyone in town who can perform a marriage ceremony?" "Reverend Thompson can do it. He lives in the house behind the church, the one with the blue shutters. Tell him I sent you." Wyatt thanked him, and they left the store with their supplies. As they walked down the street toward the church, Clara felt her anxiety ease slightly. No one here seemed to know who she was or be looking for her. Maybe she really had escaped Douglas Morrison after all. The Reverend Thompson was a kind man in his 60s who agreed to marry them that very afternoon. They stood in the small church with the Reverend and his wife as witnesses, and Clara felt tears stream down her face as she and Wyatt exchanged vows. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her heart might burst. "I love you, Mrs. Oakes," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. They spent that night at the town's only boarding house, celebrating their marriage in private. In the morning, they would head back to the cabin, back to their life in the mountains. But for now, Clara let herself simply be happy, wrapped in her husband's arms and feeling more at peace than she had in years. The next morning, as they were loading their supplies onto the horses, a man approached them. He was young, maybe 30, with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "Excuse me," he said, tipping his hat to Clara. "I am Deputy Miller. I'm hoping you can help me with something." Wyatt stepped slightly in front of Clara, his body language protective. "What is it?" "I'm looking for a woman who went missing from El Paso about 6 months ago. Clara Crawford. Her fiancé has been searching for her, worried she might have gotten hurt or lost." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and showed them a sketch. It was crude, but it was unmistakably Clara. Clara's blood turned to ice. Beside her, Wyatt went very still. "Why are you asking us?" Wyatt said, his voice neutral. "Well, I heard you just got married yesterday, and your wife is new to town. I figured it could not hurt to ask. Has either of you seen this woman or heard anything about her?" Clara opened her mouth, but Wyatt spoke first. "No, sorry, have not seen her. My wife is from Santa Fe. We met last year when I was trading up there." The deputy studied them for a moment, and Clara was sure he was going to call Wyatt a liar. But then he nodded and tucked the sketch back into his pocket. "All right. Well, if you hear anything, let me know. Her fiancé is offering a reward for information." "Will do," Wyatt said. He helped Clara onto her horse, and they rode out of town at a measured pace, not so fast as to attract suspicion, but not slowly either. Clara did not speak until they were miles out of Roswell, the town nothing but a smudge on the horizon behind them. Then she turned to Wyatt, her voice shaking. "He found me. Douglas found me." "He found that you might be in this area," Wyatt corrected, "but he does not know where you are, and he does not know you are married now. We are safe, Clara." "For how long?" she demanded. "He is offering a reward, Wyatt. People talk. Someone is going to tell him that you live up in the mountains, that you just married a woman from Santa Fe. He will put it together." Wyatt reached over and took her hand, steadying her. "Even if he does, he has to get through me to get to you. And I promise you, Clara, that is not going to happen." "I do not want you to have to fight my battles," Clara said, though she held tight to his hand. "They are my battles too now," Wyatt said firmly. "You are my wife. What threatens you threatens me. We are in this together." They rode back to the cabin in tense silence, and Clara could not shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She had been foolish to think she could just disappear, that a man like Douglas Morrison would give up so easily. Men like him did not accept being defied. When they reached the cabin, Wyatt immediately set about making preparations. He cleaned and loaded all his weapons, checked the perimeter of the property for signs of anyone having been there, and made sure they had enough food and water to last if they needed to hole up for a while. Clara watched him work, feeling helpless and scared. That night, as they lay in bed, Clara clung to Wyatt. "What if he kills you?" she whispered. "What if I lose you because of my mistakes?" Wyatt cupped her face in his hands, his blue-gray eyes intense. "Listen to me. You made no mistake. You ran from a man who threatened your life. That was brave and smart. And you are not going to lose me. I'm not going to let some entitled fool take away the life we have built together. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, wanting desperately to believe him. "I need you to trust me," Wyatt said. "Can you do that?" "I trust you," Clara said, and she meant it. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The next few weeks passed in an uneasy peace. Wyatt remained vigilant, always aware of their surroundings, while Clara threw herself into work around the cabin. She tended the small garden they had started, repaired clothes, and practiced shooting until she could hit a target from 50 yards away. She refused to be a helpless victim if Douglas Morrison came for her. Spring was in full bloom, the mountains alive with wildflowers and the sound of rushing water from the snowmelt, when Wyatt came back from checking his traps with a grim expression. "What is wrong?" Clara asked immediately. "Someone has been on the property," Wyatt said. "I found fresh horse tracks about a mile from here, leading up from the main trail. They circled around and then headed back down." Clara's stomach dropped. "Do you think it was him? Douglas?" "I do not know. Could be just someone passing through. But we need to be ready in case it was not." That night, they barely slept. Wyatt kept his rifle close, and Clara had the revolver he had given her tucked under her pillow. Every sound outside the cabin made them both tense, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. It came just after dawn. Clara was making coffee when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked at Wyatt, who was already on his feet, rifle in hand. "Get behind the bed," he said quietly, "and keep your gun ready." Clara did as she was told, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She heard voices outside, and then someone pounded on the door. "Wyatt Oakes!" a man's voice called. "I know Clara Crawford is in there. Send her out, and there does not have to be any trouble." Clara recognized that voice. Douglas Morrison. Wyatt did not open the door. "She's my wife now," he called back, "and she's not going anywhere." There was a pause, and then Douglas's voice came again, harder this time. "Your wife? That is impossible. She's engaged to me." "Was engaged," Wyatt corrected. "She broke it off. And even if she had not, it would not matter. She is married to me now, legal and binding. You have no claim on her." "I have every claim," Douglas shouted, and Clara could hear the rage in his voice. "She is mine. She accepted my proposal, took my money. She does not get to just run off and play house with some mountain man." "I accepted nothing from you but abuse," Clara called out, unable to stay silent any longer. She stood and moved to stand beside Wyatt, ignoring his glare. "I tried to leave with dignity, but you would not let me. You shot me, Douglas. You nearly killed me." "That was an accident," Douglas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted you to stay." "By threatening to kill me," Clara said. "That is not love, Douglas. That is control, and I will not live like that." There was silence for a moment, and then Douglas's voice turned cold. "If you will not come out, then I will come in, and your husband can try to stop me if he wants. I brought men with me." Wyatt's jaw clenched. He looked at Clara, and in his eyes she saw determination and fury and love all mixed together. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. Then he opened the door. Douglas Morrison stood on the porch with two other men, all armed. He was tall and well-dressed, with dark hair and a handsome face that was currently twisted with anger. His eyes locked on Clara, and she saw possessiveness and rage burning there. "Clara," he said, his voice trying for reasonable and failing, "this is ridiculous. Come home. We can work this out." "I am home," Clara said firmly, "and there's nothing to work out. I do not want to be with you, Douglas. I never did. I was grieving and scared, and you took advantage of that." "I took advantage?" Douglas's laugh was bitter. "I offered you everything, a home, security, a good name, and you threw it all away for what? A life of poverty in the wilderness with a man who barely speaks?" "I chose love," Clara said. "Real love, not ownership, and I would rather live in poverty with Wyatt than in luxury with you." Douglas's face darkened, and his hand moved toward his gun. But Wyatt was faster. His rifle came up, aimed directly at Douglas's chest. "Do not," Wyatt said, his voice deadly calm. "I'm a very good shot, and at this range I will not miss, neither will my wife." He jerked his head toward Clara, who had her revolver aimed at one of the other men. Douglas froze, his eyes flicking between Wyatt and Clara. "You're making a mistake," he said to Clara. "I have money, influence. I can make your life very difficult." "You already tried that," Clara said. "It did not work. Go home, Douglas. Find someone else to control. I am done." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then, slowly, Douglas stepped back, his hands moving away from his gun. "This is not over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He could see that he had lost, that Clara was beyond his reach now. "Yes, it is," Wyatt said. "If you come back here, I will shoot you on sight. And if you send anyone else after my wife, I will hunt you down and make you regret it. Do we understand each other?" Douglas's face flushed with humiliation and rage, but he nodded jerkily. He turned and mounted his horse, his two companions following suit. As they rode away, Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. Wyatt caught her, holding her up. "It is over," he murmured against her hair. "He is gone." Clara clung to him, shaking. "Do you think he will really leave us alone?" "Yes," Wyatt said with certainty. "Men like him are bullies. They only fight when they think they can win. He knows now that you have someone to protect you, and that I am not afraid of him. He will move on to an easier target." Clara hoped he was right, but even if Douglas did come back, she knew now that she and Wyatt could face it together. She was not the scared, wounded woman who had shown up at his door all those months ago. She was stronger now, braver, and she had Wyatt by her side. They stood on the porch for a long time, watching the trail to make sure Douglas and his men really left. Finally, when they were sure they were alone again, they went back inside. Wyatt built up the fire and made them both coffee, and they sat together in silence, processing everything that had happened. "I am proud of you," Wyatt said finally. "You stood up to him, told him the truth. That took courage." Clara managed a shaky smile. "I learned from the best." He pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We live our lives," Wyatt said simply. "We build our home, start a family if you want. We do not let fear dictate our choices anymore." Clara looked up at him, seeing the future reflected in his eyes. "A family?" "If you want," Wyatt repeated, but she could hear the hope in his voice. "I want," Clara said, smiling for real now. "I want everything with you, Wyatt. A family, a life, a future, all of it." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, a promise of the life they would build together. And when he carried her to their bed, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The months that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. True to his word, Douglas Morrison did not return. They heard through traders passing through that he had returned to El Paso and married someone else within the year, a young woman from a wealthy family. Clara felt only relief at the news. He was finally, truly out of her life. Summer in the mountains was glorious. Clara's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables to supplement the meat Wyatt hunted. They took long walks through the forests, swam in the cold mountain streams, and made love under the stars. Clara had never known that life could be so simple and so full at the same time. In August, she realized she was pregnant. She told Wyatt one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression stunned, and then he let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, making her laugh breathlessly. "Are you sure?" he asked, setting her down carefully as if she might break. "I'm sure," Clara said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Wyatt. You're going to be a father." His eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her close, holding her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. "I'm going to be a father," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Clara, I do not even know what to say." "Say you are happy," she prompted, smiling up at him. "I'm so happy," he said fiercely. "You have given me everything, Clara. A home, a purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning. And now a child. I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," Clara said, echoing the words he had once said to her. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." They talked late into the night about names and whether the baby would be a boy or a girl, about how they would need to expand the cabin before winter came. Wyatt was already making plans, his mind always working ahead, trying to make sure his family had everything they needed. Over the next few months, Wyatt worked tirelessly to prepare for the baby. He added another room to the cabin, building a sturdy wall and installing a window so there would be plenty of light. He made a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving little animals into the sides, deer and rabbits and mountain lions. Clara watched him work, her heart so full of love she thought it might overflow. Winter came again, and this time Clara was not afraid. She was safe and loved, and carrying a child who would be born into a family that wanted them. When the snow piled high and the nights grew long, she and Wyatt would sit by the fire, her head on his shoulder and his hand on her growing belly, feeling their baby kick and move. "What do you think about the name William if it is a boy?" Wyatt asked one night. "After my father." "I think that is perfect," Clara said. And if it is a girl, maybe Catherine, after my mother? Catherine Oakes, Wyatt said, testing it out. I like it. In early March, with the winter still holding the mountains in its grip, Clara went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was terrified that something would go wrong. But Wyatt was with her the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, and when their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Clara felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "A boy," Wyatt said, his voice choked with emotion as he held their son for the first time. "We have a son, Clara." "William," Clara said softly, reaching up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Our William." Wyatt laid the baby in her arms, and Clara looked down at her son's perfect little face, his eyes squinted shut and his mouth open in outrage at being thrust into the cold world. She felt tears stream down her face, but they were happy tears. She'd never imagined this life for herself married to a mountain man, living in a cabin miles from civilization, a mother. But she could not imagine wanting anything else. Thank you," she said to Wyatt, looking up to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her cry harder. "Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for giving me all of this." "Thank you for showing up at my door," Wyatt said, kissing her forehead. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Oakes." They spent the next few days in a haze of exhaustion and joy, learning how to care for their newborn son. William was a good baby, sleeping in long stretches and nursing eagerly when he was awake. Wyatt was a natural father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with William when he fussed. Clara watched them together and fell in love with her husband all over again. Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the mountains. Clara recovered from the birth, and soon she was back to helping with chores, though Wyatt insisted she take things slowly. They fell into a new rhythm, their days now organized around William's needs. It was exhausting and wonderful, and everything Clara had never known she wanted. When summer came, they took William on his first trip to Roswell. Clara was nervous about going back to town, but Wyatt assured her they would be safe. And he was right. No one gave them a second glance as they walked through town, just another family among many. They bought supplies and sold furs, and the storekeeper congratulated them on their son. As they rode back to the cabin, William asleep in a sling against Clara's chest, she looked over at Wyatt and smiled. "I am happy," she said simply. "So am I," Wyatt said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. The years passed in a blur of love and work and the everyday joys of family life. William grew into a bright, curious boy with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. When he was 3, Clara became pregnant again, and 9 months later, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine. 2 years after that came another son, James. The cabin grew with their family, Wyatt adding more rooms as they needed them. They built a larger garden and acquired chickens and a cow. Clara taught the children to read using the books Wyatt had collected, and Wyatt taught them to hunt and fish and survive in the wilderness. It was a hard life in many ways, but it was also rich and full. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and Clara and Wyatt sat together on the porch watching the stars, they would talk about that night she had shown up at his door, bleeding and desperate. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked once. "Letting me in? Your life was so much simpler before I arrived." Wyatt looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Simpler, maybe, but not better. Never better. You are my life, Clara. You and the children. I was just existing before you. You taught me how to live again." Clara leaned against him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, and thought about how much had changed. She had fled El Paso expecting to die, and instead, she had found a life beyond her wildest dreams. She had found love and safety and a home. She had found Wyatt. "I love you," she said, the words never losing their power no matter how many times she said them. "I love you too," Wyatt said, kissing the top of her head. "Always." As the years continued to unfold, their family thrived in the mountains. William grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt with a skill that made Wyatt proud. Catherine was fierce and independent, insisting on learning everything her brother learned and often doing it better. James was the gentlest of the three, with a love for animals and a gift for carving wood like his father. When William was 15, he asked his parents about how they had met. Clara and Wyatt exchanged glances. And then Clara told him the story about Douglas Morrison, about the gunshot wound, about showing up at Wyatt's door with no explanation. "You asked no questions?" William said to his father, amazed. "No questions," Wyatt confirmed. "Your mother needed help, and that was all that mattered." "That is the kind of man you should aspire to be," Clara told her son. "Someone who helps without demanding explanations, who protects without seeking credit, someone like your father." William nodded seriously, taking the lesson to heart, and Clara knew that whatever path her children chose in life, they would carry with them the values she and Wyatt had tried to instill: courage, compassion, and the understanding that love was a choice you made every single day. The children grew up and eventually left the cabin to make their own way in the world. William became a rancher in Colorado, marrying a kind woman named Sarah and giving Clara and Wyatt their first grandchildren. Catherine moved to Santa Fe and opened a boarding house, running it with the same fierce independence she had shown as a child. James stayed closer to home, building his own cabin just 5 miles from theirs and working as a hunting guide. Clara and Wyatt grew old together in the mountains they loved. Wyatt's hair turned silver, and his body, while still strong, moved a bit slower. Clara's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, marks of a life well lived and full of laughter. But they were still deeply in love, still reaching for each other in the night, still sitting on the porch at sunset, and marveling at the beauty around them. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Clara with a gift journal he had been keeping all these years, documenting their life together. Clara read through it with tears streaming down her face, seeing their love story through his eyes. "You kept all of this?" she asked, overwhelmed. "Every moment worth remembering," Wyatt said. "Which is to say, every moment with you." Clara closed the journal and pulled him into a kiss. "You are still the most romantic man I have ever known." "Only for you," he said, and she knew it was true. More years passed. They became great-grandparents, their family growing and spreading across the territory, but through it all, the cabin in the mountains remained their home, the place where their love story had begun. When Clara was 67, she fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed into something more serious. Wyatt stayed by her side constantly, caring for her with the same gentle hands that had tended her gunshot wound all those years ago. Their children came to visit, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, filling the cabin with noise and love. On a clear autumn day, with golden aspen leaves drifting past the windows, Clara called Wyatt to her side. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding her hand, his eyes reflecting the fear he tried to hide. "Do not be afraid," Clara said softly. "We have had the most wonderful life together, Wyatt. I have no regrets." "I am not ready to lose you," Wyatt said, his voice breaking. "You will never lose me," Clara assured him. "I will always be with you in every sunset, in every mountain breeze. You saved my life that night I showed up at your door. But more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and happiness beyond measure. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." Wyatt brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You saved me too, you know. I was lost before you came. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be grateful for every new day. I love you, Clara. I have loved you from that very first night, and I will love you until my last breath." Clara smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "And I love you, my mountain man. Always." She passed peacefully that evening, surrounded by family, with Wyatt holding her hand. And though his heart broke at her loss, he was grateful for every moment they had shared. Wyatt lived for another 5 years after Clara died, tending the cabin and the land they had loved, visited often by his children and grandchildren. He told them stories about their grandmother, about the night she had shown up at his door, and how his life had changed forever in that moment. He made sure they understood that love was the most important thing, that it was worth any risk, any sacrifice. When his time came, on a cold winter morning with fresh snow falling outside the cabin, Wyatt died in his sleep, a peaceful expression on his weathered face, and those who knew him said that at the very end he had smiled, as if seeing someone he loved waiting for him. The cabin stood for many years after, maintained by their descendants as a testament to the love story that had begun there. And on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the pines, People said you could sometimes see two figures on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars together, a mountain man and the woman who had shown up at his door with a gunshot wound and no explanation, forever bound by the love that had saved them both. Their story became legend in the family, passed down through generations as an example of what true love looked like. It was not perfect or easy. It was born out of desperation and fear, forged through hardship and danger, but it was real and deep and lasting. It was the kind of love that transcended time and death, the kind of love that lived on in the hearts of those who heard the tale. And so the story ended, not with tragedy or loss, but with triumph. Clara Crawford, who had fled a life of violence and control, found freedom and love in the arms of Wyatt Oakes, the mountain man who asked no questions and offered only safety and devotion. Together, they built a life that was simple in its foundations, but rich in love, a life that produced children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the blood on her dress that first night, not the fear that had driven her to his door, not the dangers they had faced together. What mattered was the life they had built, the love they had shared, and the family they had created. That was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished, a testament to the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds and transform even the darkest moments into something beautiful. The mountains stood eternal, witness to their story, and in the cabin where it had all begun, their love lived on. A beacon for all who came after, proof that sometimes the most broken among us can find the greatest healing, and that love, real love, was always worth fighting for. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would bring their own children to the cabin, showing them the bed where Clara had been nursed back to health, the porch where Wyatt and Clara had spent countless evenings, the cradle Wyatt had carved for William. They told the story again and again, how their great-grandmother had arrived bleeding and terrified, and how their great-grandfather had taken her in without hesitation, without judgment, without questions. That is what love looks like, they would say. Not the easy kind that comes when everything is perfect, but the hard kind that chooses to show up even when things are difficult. The kind that asks no questions but offers everything. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, understanding even at their young age that this story was special, that it contained a truth they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The cabin remained in the family for over 100 years, maintained and preserved as a reminder of where they had all come from. In time, it became a place where members of the family would go when they needed peace or clarity, when they needed to remember what was truly important. They would sit on that same porch where Wyatt and Clara had sat, looking out at those same mountains, and they would feel the presence of their ancestors, the love that had started it all still echoing through the years. And on the mantel, in a place of honor, sat the wooden comb Wyatt had carved for Clara that first Christmas, its flowers still delicate and beautiful despite the passage of time. Next to it was the journal Wyatt had kept, its pages filled with his careful handwriting documenting every precious moment of their life together. These treasures were passed down through the family, tangible proof of a love that had conquered fear and violence and doubt, a love that had created something lasting and true. So ended the story of Clara Crawford and Wyatt Oakes, the woman with a gunshot wound and the mountain man who asked no questions. It was a story of survival and salvation, of courage and devotion, of a love that began in desperation and grew into something magnificent. It was a story that proved that sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest futures, that sometimes the people we meet by chance become the most important people in our lives, and that love, when it is real and true and freely given, has the power to transform everything. They had found each other in the wilderness, two broken souls seeking refuge from their pasts, and together they had built something beautiful, a home, a family, a legacy of love that would endure for generations. That was their gift to the world, the proof that no matter how lost you might feel, no matter how dark your circumstances, there is always hope for redemption, for healing, for happiness. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not how the story began, but how it unfolded, how it grew, and how it ended with love triumphant, with a family gathered around, with a legacy that would never be forgotten. Clara and Wyatt had found their happily ever after, not in spite of the hardships they faced, but because of them. Because those hardships had forged them into the people they needed to be, had brought them to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The mountains stood witness, eternal and unchanging, and in their shadow the story lived on a tale of love and courage, of healing and hope, of a woman who showed up at a door with a gunshot wound and no explanation, and the mountain man who asked no questions but gave her everything, including his heart. And they lived, loved, and built a life together that was everything they had ever dreamed of and more. A life that ended only when death parted them, and even then, their love continued, eternal as the mountains themselves, a beacon for all who came after, showing them what was possible when two people chose love over fear, trust over doubt, and forever over anything less.